I think, you know, the times are changing. They're not as fast as we would like, but there is some positive thing to be said about somebody being confirmed who will, of course, be there to uphold the empire. Let's not have any illusions about what Chuck Hagel is going to do. But the fact that it looks like it's going through despite so much opposition is interesting. And so what I didn't hear today, and those of you who might have seen the whole thing, did you hear the word drones mentioned? Anybody hear it mentioned? I don't think it was mentioned in the hours of questioning, which is quite extraordinary because the drone program that I'm going to talk about tonight is not only done by the CIA, but it's also done by the military, and by the most secret part of the military, the Joint Special Operations Command. So to have hours of questioning about what is the future and what vision do you have for US policy, and not to have a question come up about how you feel about remote controlled killing and the increased use of drones is quite remarkable. And it does show how bipartisan the support is for the drone program. And we will see that probably in full swing next week when John Brennan has his confirmation hearings as head of the CIA. And I'm glad there's some hissing. Let's do some big, big hissing. Yeah. Because it really is disgusting that this guy went from being unconfirmable 4 years ago when he was nominated by President Obama to be head of the same agency, the CIA, but because his high position in the CIA during the time of the Bush administration, when they were involved in torture and extraordinary rendition, enhanced interrogation techniques, there was an outcry, and John Brennan was forced to withdraw his nomination. So fast forward 4 years later, when he's not only had that horrible history under the Bush years, but add on top of that being the mastermind of this assassination by drone program, and all of a sudden he's not controversial anymore? Quite extraordinary. But it does show this incredible bipartisan support that there is. So I was looking at the evolution of US public opinion about the wars as an activist, and I know many of you in the room are such amazing activists, and I feel so honored to be part of the movement with you. But we know that when we started opposing the war in Iraq, how we were treated like enemies, like if you were against the invasion, you were pro-Al-Qaeda. We were sort of the equivalent of terrorists, and how over the years public opinion shifted so that there wasn't this support for the Iraq war anymore. And then Obama came in saying that Afghanistan was the good war. And there was still a majority of Americans that thought, okay, Afghanistan is where we should be. And now that has eroded after 10 years to where the majority of Americans say, you know, I don't think these wars make sense anymore. And even Afghanistan, why are we there after 10 years upholding a corrupt dictatorship or a corrupt regime that doesn't have the support of its own people? And even the majority of Republicans saying we should be out of Afghanistan. And many, many Americans thinking, why are we waiting for another 2 years to do that? Let's just get out now. Well, the powers that be in this country, whether it's in the White House or in the Pentagon, have understood this shift of opinion, and in the meantime have been shifting the way of waging war. And that's where the drones come in. At the time of the 9/11 attacks, there were almost no drones in the US arsenal. And today there are somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000. What are these drones? Well, a drone is only something that flies, and it has sensors on it, cameras on it, so you get real-time relaying. And they can be just for surveillance, which is the majority of drones, and in many cases, They can be small, just like you see here. They mimic nature, so you have drones that look just like a hummingbird. You might see a beautiful little bird one day outside your window and think, how pretty. Little do you know, it's checking everything you do. One that looks like a dragonfly. The majority of drones are the size that a soldier can put in his or her backpack. And there are two kinds of drones in the backpack category. One is a reconnaissance drone that can just look ahead and let the soldiers know what's there before they go. And the other is a kamikaze type drone that is going to its target, and when it gets there, it explodes the target and it explodes itself. And then there is some controversy in this movement, and we can have a discussion about this. Are there good drones? I actually think there are good drones, that it's just a piece of technology, and it's a question of how it's used. And I see that the Brazilian government, for example, is using drones in vast extenses of the Amazon, where it would be very costly and difficult to have a piloted plane. The planes have to refuel. The drones can be up there for long periods of time. The pilot gets tired. The drone doesn't. And they can do a better job at pinpointing illegal logging in the Amazon. There are environmental groups that recognize on the high seas, again, vast extenses of land, to try to find where illegal logging is going, whaling is going on. Drones are helpful. And there are search and rescue possibilities for drones. So I think that it's a technology that's here to stay, and that we should look at the possible good uses for it. But unfortunately, what is really driving the drone industry is the killer drones. And the killer drones, Reaper and Predator drones that we're using now, have been developed by a company in Southern California called General Atomics. They were originally just surveillance drones, until some engineers realized that they could strap on some missiles or other type of military equipment and turn them into lethal drones.
How big is the one you just showed?
Excuse me?
How big is the one you just showed?
Well, it's the size of a small airplane. And then there are bigger drones than that are the size of a commercial airplane, like the Global Hawk. And the Global Hawk is a drone that can sit atop a city and take pictures of the entire city, both very, very fine and very, very large. And they are being used for surveillance purposes around the world. They are very expensive drones. You know, they brag about the drones being cheap, but the Global Hawk, they're about $200 million. And one thing about these drones is that the technology is still in its early stage, and they crash all the time. The Air Force has admitted that a third of their drones crashed, and the Global Hawk crashes a lot as well. There was a Global Hawk that just a couple of months ago crashed outside in the state of Maryland, and luckily it was in a swamp, but it could have crashed in a residential neighborhood. So the basics of the killer drone is that the pilot can just be about anywhere in the world. And right now, most of the pilots are here in the United States. So it's a surreal kind of science fiction scenario where you have the pilots who are sitting in these air-conditioned rooms at Air Force bases. There was a study that was done that said that the chairs weren't comfortable enough, and now they have more ergonomic chairs. And they are using consoles that are modeled after PlayStations, after video games. The UN has accused the US of starting a PlayStation mentality towards war. And these remote-controlled pilots are killers by day and family men by night. This is a New Yorker cartoon where the woman is in the kitchen and the pilot is sitting at his computer and saying, "Oh, are you attacking from home today?" One of the chapters in my book is about the pilots because they react so differently to this. Some of them, in fact, the majority of them in a study done by the Pentagon said their biggest problem was boredom. that they're sitting at the screen hour after hour after hour, and most of the time they're not doing anything but looking at the screen. Some of them say they would rather be on the battlefield, that that's what they signed up for. And they see their buddies on the ground and they would like to be there with them. Others say that it's a much better way of waging war because your life is not at risk and you can go home to your family afterwards. And others have been shown that they have a certain level of PTSD, almost equivalent to soldiers in the battlefield, because it is very hard for some people to cope with the fact that you are killing by day and then coaching the Little League team the next morning. So what do they kill? Who do they kill, and under what kind of rubric is the killing done? Well, there's two things going on. One is called a personality strike. I hate these names, but it's the name they use. And that is, we know the person that they're trying to kill. And excuse me, but you have a beard, so I'm just going to go for you. So you are, let's say, somebody, we know your name, don't like you. And so every Tuesday there is a meeting in the White House called Terror Tuesdays where they will look at the profiles. Your profile, sorry Nate, your profile, sorry, your profile. And they say they resemble a baseball card, you see the pictures and a little bio, and the people are nominated to be on this kill list. And the kill list is really in the hands of John Brennan, but it is okayed by President Obama. It also came out in the papers that the way they define militants is anybody who is a male of military age that lives in the zones where we are using these strikes. Just astounding that by definition you are a militant. So there is a kill list where you know the person you're going after. And then there is something else called the signature strike. And that is killing people on the basis of suspicious behavior. So you're looking thousands of miles away at a country you know nothing about, people you don't know, don't speak the language, don't know the culture, and you're supposed to be judging what is suspicious behavior. Now, we can only name 2% of the people who have been killed by name. And those were people that were considered high target, high value targets. The rest of the 98%, who are they? Well, many of them innocent people, many of them low-level Taliban, but certainly not people that we hear about in the news when we hear about, aha, we killed number 2, number 3, number 4, and of course, every time you kill number 2, number 3 becomes number 2. So where have we used these strikes? Very much in Iraq. Continue to use them in Afghanistan, use them in Libya, and in Libya it's a particularly important case to look at because when the administration decided to go in militarily in Libya and give air cover, they said because we're only using drones, there are no American lives at risk, and because there's no American lives at risk, Congress has nothing to do with this. This doesn't bring in the War Powers Act. And so it's an end run around Congress, makes it much easier for the executive branch to get us involved in violent actions. Drones are used in Pakistan, Yemen. It seems like there have been 2 drone strikes in the Philippines and maybe soon to come in Mali. There are drone bases that have been set up around the world, in the Middle East, in Africa. You might have heard most recently the idea of setting up a drone base in Niger. And remember that one of the reasons that Osama bin Laden said that he hated the United States was the US bases that were in Holy Lands. And quietly under the Bush administration, the US pulled out the bases in Saudi Arabia. Now under the Obama administration, it looks like there are drone bases in Saudi Arabia. The majority of the strikes have been in Pakistan. And all of this information is information cobbled together by independent journalists because our government does not give out this information because it is indeed a covert program. The drone strikes were used somewhat under the Bush administration, but does anybody here, can you say what was the favorite option of the Bush administration in terms of picking out people who they thought were terrorists?
Extraordinary rendition.
Extraordinary rendition is one, and what else did they do? What? Where did they put them? In Guantanamo, right. So picking up people, putting them into Guantanamo. Well, President Obama campaigned on closing down Guantanamo and hasn't done it. And in the meantime, his advisors, his legal advisors said, you know, it's very messy to pick up people and put them in prison. What kind of trials can you give them? Military trials, civilian trials, what happens when they're innocent, which happened to the vast majority of people that were put into Guantanamo. And the solution has been just kill them. So,
and the drones pick up people?
Oh no, the drone cannot pick up people, and that's something very important to recognize, because when you talk about international law, you're supposed to give people a chance to surrender, and you're supposed to try to capture people before you kill them. A drone cannot capture people, and you can't surrender to a drone. So I hope that the American people are a compassionate people, just like I think people all over the world are, if given the right information. And I hope that the reason that so many Americans think these drones are great is because they don't get a chance to see pictures like the ones I'm going to show you of children who've been killed by these drones. And this is a photographer who risks his life in northern Pakistan to get these pictures. Somebody that we met with, where's Lois, who was on the trip to Pakistan with me, that came and talked to us and brought in a whole bag full of photos that he was showing us. These are some of the pictures of what drone victims look like. You know, most of the time when a drone hits its target, it vaporizes the target so that there's nothing left at all. Sometimes they say there's a couple of pieces of flesh lying out or hanging on trees. So most of these pictures are people who were hit by flying debris, by the shrapnel. This was a man that we met when we were in Pakistan, and he told us about a call that he got in the middle of the night on December 31st, 2009, when he was in the capital, Islamabad, to say that his home in Waziristan was leveled by drones, and that his son and his brother were killed in the drone strike. And he talked about how his brother was a very well-educated man that decided to come back to the village and be the village school teacher because the Taliban was active in that region, and he was against the Taliban, and he wanted to teach the young people that education was much more important than picking up a gun. And the same thing for Kareem's son, who came back to work in the village school. And Kareem said, imagine the kind of lesson that was taught to the students when their beloved teachers were killed by a drone. And imagine the kind of hatred that this left in the minds of these young people. We also got to talk to some of the men about another case that happened when there was a traditional gathering called a jirga, and it had been called to adjudicate a dispute about a local mine. And for the drone pilots thousands of miles away, it must have looked like a gathering of no-good Taliban, and they sent in the drones, and they killed 42 of the most respected leaders in the community. So again, imagine the spread of hatred in that community for the United States. The young man that you see in this picture, his name is Tariq Aziz. He was 16 years old. His family was a victim of drone strikes, and he was invited as a drone strike victim family member to the capital city to meet with other family members and lawyers to talk about what could they do in the courts to get some redress. And as they were discussing, they realized that one of the problems is they don't have enough documentation of these drone strikes because journalists aren't allowed into these areas. So he's one of the young men who volunteered to become a citizen journalist. And they trained him to use a video camera. And he was very excited about going back to his village because he said the drones were terrorizing people in the village. not only were they killing people, but the buzzing sound constantly over their heads was driving them crazy. And little did he or anyone in that gathering know that 2 days later, the first drone strike that would be documented was his own death, which happened while he was driving in a car. There was virtually nothing left of his body or the body of the 12-year-old who was with him. The lawyers went to the US Embassy and said, what the? They said, why did you kill this young man? He wasn't a militant, he wasn't involved in any militant activity. They said, well, we thought he was a militant. And the lawyer said, but he was in the capital city for 4 days. He was staying in a hotel. Why couldn't you have gone in and captured him? Why couldn't you have brought him to trial? Why couldn't you have allowed him to have some defense? And the US officials had no answer for that. And the answer is because they don't have to. So there was a very good study done by NYU and Stanford Law School called Living Under Drones that showed that it's not just the people who are killed by the drones, it's the terrorizing of the community. And how in some cases it seems like the pilots are flying the drones low enough so they can be seen and heard, and that's part of the terrorizing. And parents are afraid to let their kids go to school, and they're afraid to go to the marketplace, they're afraid to go to weddings, they're afraid to go to funerals that have been targeted, and they are also afraid to help victims of drone strikes because there's something called a double tap, which is they send in the Hellfire missiles, and then they send in another round of missiles to get the people who they missed. Well, the people who they missed tend to be people who are running in to rescue those that were hit by the first drone strikes. And it got so bad that there are humanitarian organizations in the region that have told their own workers that they're not allowed to go rescue anybody until 6 hours after the drone strike because they don't want their own humanitarian workers to be killed. It also sows tremendous distrust in the community because people are looking at their neighbors to say who is being targeted and who is giving people this information about who to target. And so everybody starts to distrust everybody else. And the Taliban come in afterwards to take revenge on the people that they thought were working with the Americans. And so it has really disrupted community life in whole swaths of Pakistan. The response of the Pakistanis has been extreme anger, not only in the areas where we are using the drones, but in the entire population. And it was interesting that General McChrystal, who is not a sympathizer at all to the Taliban, said the other day that Americans have no idea the visceral hatred that people have developed because of this drone program. And he said this is not just among people who have seen a drone or know a victim, but among anybody in the countries that we are using them. And the Pakistani government has said stop using the drone. This is a picture of a delegation, 34 of us who went to Pakistan because we thought it was so important to reach out to the Pakistani people and say that we are ashamed of what our government is doing, that we think that your lives are important, just as important as our own lives, and certainly the lives of your children are as important as the lives of our children. And it was amazing the kind of response that we received. In this picture, you see a couple of the drone victim families in this picture with us. We did rallies inside Islamabad. We drove up to the very dangerous tribal areas to be able to speak to people in that region. And we also got in front of a huge group of people who were shouting as we came in. And we had been told by our embassy, don't go, the Taliban are after you, they're going to blow you up. There's camels with explosives ready to kill you. The group went anyway, and as we walked into a rally, what we heard was people saying in English, welcome, welcome, we want peace, we want peace. And it was a beautiful reception, and people afterwards, when we were leaving, well, we spent another day in Islamabad doing a fast in memory of all those innocent victims, and the entire day people kept coming up to us saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And as we were leaving, a woman that I had stayed to meet with, who's in the legislature, said, you have done more to win the hearts and minds of the Pakistani people than the billions of dollars that your government has given us over the years. That we were on the TV and the newspapers, people knew us as we walked in the streets, and they said they were just so happy to see there were Americans that cared about their lives. And it showed that if you give out some love, you get a lot of love back. If you give it. So this drone strike program that's been so counterproductive in the case of Pakistan is being replicated now in Yemen. And there are people inside, former intelligence officers from the administration who say, you know, this isn't really a strategy, this is just something to do. They call it a whack-a-mole policy, where you hit them in one place and then they go somewhere else, and so you hit them somewhere else, and it just seems like you were doing something. But it really is not a strategy that makes any sense. If you want to stop war, it might make sense if you want to see us in a state of perpetual war. And in the case of Yemen, the drone strikes have been increased tremendously in the past year. They started in 2009, again under the Obama administration. In 2009, there were maybe 200 people that were allied with extremist groups, like the group Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. After all these drone strikes, it's now estimated that there's over 1,000 people who have joined these extremist groups. And there have been many people that we are in touch with over Twitter and Facebook, young people from Yemen, and they say, if my relative is killed by a drone strike, I will join Al-Qaeda. Not because I like Al-Qaeda, I hate Al-Qaeda, I hate their ideology, I hate what they stand for, but I will do that because that is the only way that I can feel that I'm getting some kind of justice. A very sad commentary. So I don't know how many of you, raise your hand if you know the story of Anwar alAwlaki. So not too many of you. Anwar alAwlaki was an American-born imam, became a very fiery priest, sermons against the West, and moved to his parents' home of Yemen. He was, according to the administration, involved in militant activities, was put on a kill list, and was killed in a US drone strike along with another American named Samir Khan. In the meantime, alAwlaki's son, Abdulrahman alAwlaki, was born in Denver. These are pictures that you see from his Facebook. Looks like a sweet kid, said on his Facebook that he loved hip-hop, and he loved rap, and he loved swimming, and his friend said he had absolutely no interest in politics and any militant kind of activity. He was taken to Yemen to live with his grandparents, and 2 weeks after his father was killed, he was in his, a small village up in Yemen, having a meal outdoors with a bunch of teenagers at a campfire when the drones came in and the Hellfire missiles were launched and killed the entire group of teenagers. Now, I put a quote on here. Former White House spokesperson Robert Gibbs, asked to justify the killing of the younger alAwlaki, said, "I would suggest that you have a far more responsible father." What has been really amazing about this case is the lack of outcry among the legal community, among the community in general. And I think about the case of Trayvon Martin. Remember Trayvon Martin, the young African-American man who was killed by George Zimmerman in Florida for nothing? And the parents were so incensed that they went out and talked and built up, and all kinds of groups took it on in the African-American community and communities of human rights groups like Amnesty, young people, and there were all these demonstrations. And Barack Obama felt obligated to say something about it. And he expressed his sympathy to the family of Trayvon Martin. And he also said, if I had a son, he might have looked like Trayvon Martin. So take a close look at that picture. And don't you think that if President Obama had a son, he could have looked like Abdulrahman alAwlaki? And yet there was not a word of sympathy for the killing of this young man. no apology, and even worse, no recognition that he had even been killed by a US drone strike. So the US has been the #1 user of the drones, but it's not the only one. And there already is a full-fledged arms race when it comes to drones. The US is selling spy drones overseas, and Israel is the #2 user of drones, having used them in Operation Cast Lead in 2008. Of the 1,400 people killed, over 800 of them were killed by drones. In this last invasion, many of the people were killed by drones as well. And Israel is the #1 exporter of drones. In fact, Israel alone has exported drones to 50 different countries. Now, these are all surveillance drones, not weaponized drones. But remember I said that the Predator and Reaper drone were surveillance drones as well. In fact, that was originally a prototype from Israel. The third producer and exporter of drones is now China. And the other issue that I brought up about drones crashing, well, drones can also be hacked. And so you can bring down drones, like the Iranians did, hacked into the software system, brought it down, and one of the most sophisticated spy drones that the US has, and reverse engineered it, and is now producing their own. And also, there was a professor from the University of Texas in Austin who showed that with $1,000 worth of equipment, he could hack into a drone and bring it down. It's called spoofing. So you might think, or other Americans might think, well, this is happening over there. Don't have to worry about it too much. We have to talk about drones coming home as well. The manufacturers of drones have a big association. They're a strong, powerful lobby. There's such a powerful lobby that there is a drone caucus in Congress. A drone caucus. Imagine that. People elected by we the people think when they get into Congress, their job is to promote the proliferation of drones. It's not called the Drone Caucus, it's called the Unmanned Aerial Systems Caucus. A little more sophisticated than that, but it's a drone caucus. And this drone manufacturers and the drone caucus are getting worried with wars winding down in Iraq and Afghanistan. Where are they going to sell all these drones that they're making? And they're looking here in the United States. And what they're really looking at is not only FBI, Border Patrol, Homeland Security, Air Force, Forest Service, but they're looking at the police stations. Because there's 18,000 police stations in this country. Imagine what a market that is. And unfortunately for the drone manufacturers, the Federal Aviation Administration has been reluctant to give out a lot of permits for drones because they know the drones crash all the time, that they're just not safe. But the manufacturers pushed through legislation that says by September 2015, the airspace must be opened up to drones. So now we're in the experimental phase where there's a couple of 100 permits that have been given out to experiment with the use of drones. And the estimates are that there will be 20 or 30,000 drones in the airspace in the United States in the coming decade. So the police departments that have been experimenting with this include this Montgomery County outside of Texas Police Department. And you laugh, but this is like a police department, you know? The militarization of our police is really disgusting. And this is one example, but what's so funny about this one is that they held a press conference to show, you know, we got our tank and we got our military equipment and now we got our own drone. And then they were showing off the drone and the drone crashed into the tank. So there are lots of police departments now that want drones because it's a new toy. But the police departments, just like every government agency, is now feeling the belt tightening with budget cuts. So Homeland Security is going to these police departments and saying, we will give you a grant to buy a drone. Imagine, they gave this county $200,000 of our tax money to buy this crappy little drone and to train their people about how to use it so well that it crashed immediately. And it's like a drug dealer that's trying to get them hooked on this new technology. And you get the smaller drone and it crashes, so you really need the bigger drone, and then you need the bigger drone because the next police department has a bigger drone. And that's the kind of cycle we're on. There are communities now who are up in arms, not literally, and are going to their police departments and saying, what are your plans to get drones? Have you applied for a grant? We don't want you to get them. We don't think you need them. Or if you're going to get them, we want to have a serious discussion with lawyers from the ACLU and other groups in here about how they're going to be used. And then there are other communities that are passing local resolutions called no drone resolutions that says until we can be guaranteed that our safety and our privacy is going to be respected, we do not want our city to be using any kinds of drones. There are copies of those on our website, which is droneswatch.org. And maybe we can pass around that sign-up sheet over there. If you if you can sign up on that, it's a good way for us to be in touch with you about what is happening around this issue, because so much is changing. When I first started working on drones, there were almost no groups involved, except I would say for Veterans for Peace. So a shout out to Veterans for Peace. Drone stuff, and why do they care so much about that? And in this last year, there's just been a huge growth in the interest and the awareness and the movement. And outside of bases where the drones are being piloted, there is an amazing movement, like in upstate New York around Hancock Air Force Base, where they have what they call a Gandhian Wave, people coming in, getting arrested, next wave coming in, bigger than the last one, getting arrested, the next one coming in. They're calling in April for as many people who can make their way to Hancock Air Force Base, and let's get lots of people to do it together. And it's really exciting how they're using the fact that they're in such close proximity to educate the entire community, to get media attention to this, and to use the court system to talk about the larger issues of international law and our responsibility under the Nuremberg principles to stop something when we think war crimes are being committed. There are lots more demonstrations happening at the bases of the drone manufacturers. In fact, General Atomics in San Diego, San Diego is a fast-changing area. It used to be very right-wing because there's so many military bases and so many weapons manufacturers, and now there's a very vibrant, progressive community. Veterans for Peace is doing a weekly demonstration outside the headquarters of General Atomics, and they've called for a national mobilization the first week of April to focus on that company. So a lot of exciting things happening. And on the campuses, there's students that are investigating what kind of contracts their university might have with the military research department like DARPA. And are their universities involved in research around lethal drones, and how can they expose that and try to stop those contracts? There's the beginning of a divestment movement on campuses to get out of companies that are involved in the production of lethal drones. And then on the international level, there are some exciting things happening as well. You might have heard that just last week, the United Nations announced that it was going to start an investigation into the US, and it looks like also the Israeli use of drones, because they are worried that war crimes are being committed. And there is a group that has been established that is not only concerned about the drones that are being used today, but about what is in the works being researched that would not even have a remote pilot, but would be a totally autonomous drone that would be pre-programmed to go to X place and kill people that look like this. And those are called killer robots. And there is a group that's come together of scientists who are horrified by what this can portend, and people who were successful in the banning of landmines and cluster bombs. And they are going to announce in April a new campaign to ban the autonomous killer drones before they are even used. So there's a lot of movement happening now. The only place the movement isn't happening is in Congress and in the White House. And that's where we really have to force them to do something, because it's just amazing. I want to circle back now to this confirmation hearing that's coming up next week, how we have been going to office to say, you've got to oppose John Brennan. And they said, don't even go there, John Brennan's going to be confirmed, you know, without question, with maybe questions asked, but we're not going to stop that confirmation. The only thing that we're going to do is ask tough questions. So, you know, we are giving them lots of tough questions that we would like to be asked, but we think the toughest questions will be asked by us, the people. And we really need to jam-pack that hearing that's happening next Thursday in Washington, D.C. And you know, it's not that far to get from Boston to Washington, D.C. And you can go cheap on the mega bus or some other bus ride. And I would really ask that any of you consider making it down to Washington, D.C. on Thursday to join us in that hearing to show the outrage that we feel that our government is killing people with these remote weapons, and that somebody like John Brennan is about to be confirmed to be the next director of the CIA. And you know, there's many people in the military that are upset with the CIA having drones, and they say the CIA is just on a killing spree. The CIA is a civilian organization that's supposed to gather intelligence. It's not supposed to be having lethal weapons and going out and killing. So there are allies, potential allies within the military on this as well. So I want to end by saying that I think in a very sophisticated crowd like this, you understand that this is just one more weapon in the arsenal, that if it weren't drones it would be something else, that this is part of a country that is an empire, and it's an empire in decline. It's an empire that can't even keep our own bridges and our roads safe. It's an empire that can't transition out from an oil-based economy into a green, renewable-based economy. It's an empire that can't even afford to send its kids to college without strapping them with incredible debts afterwards. It's an empire that won't even give us the kind of health care that so many other poorer countries around the world have, that is universal health care. And it's an empire where people are starting, I think, on the inside to connect with people on the outside and say that this empire has to transform itself. And that we on the inside, hooking up with people, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq or Yemen or wherever it is, can see the external victims of the empire. But we are also the internal victims of that empire. And what I think is positive to see is how much the peace movement that used to be so strong under the Bush administration, and now as a peace movement per se has become very weak, recognizes that we have to really hook up with all these other movements for healthcare, for education, for addressing the climate issues, and that I know so many of you in the room wear so many hats and are involved in trying to stop the Keystone Pipeline and supporting students to try to get rid of this onerous debt, and all the other kinds of justice and peace activities that you're involved in. And I actually think that you in Massachusetts are on the vanguard because of the work that you've been doing to connect those dots, to talk about bringing the war dollars home, and the work that you've done on so many different levels to say, fund our communities, not war. So I want to end by thanking you for the work that you're doing, and that I hope that this kind of work here is spreading throughout the country so that we are able to go to a place like Pakistan in future years and see that we have a policy that is not one of killing people, but one where we are extending our hands in friendship, where people in the Muslim community don't think that we hate them because we have shown that we are reaching out to people in the Muslim community with love and compassion. So thank you very much for what you're doing, and let's build that movement.